buenos días. Good morning. Thank you very much. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Welcome. If it's your first day, welcome to the EU Industry Days, Day 2. We hope you have a good time with us. If it's your second day, thank you for coming back to the plenary session. We're very happy to have you with us. It's early in the morning, and we really appreciate your punctuality. Hello to those of you who are following us online. We are very pleased to know that we have people following us, listening to us. I think about from 60 nationalities, which is just as beautiful as Europe is, this union we are part of. My name is Concha Ortiz. If you're not here yesterday, I'm your MC, and I will be conducting with you this plenary session. And yesterday, just to give you a recap of what we did, we had really interesting sessions, both in the plenary and also during the breakout sessions, and we basically discussed 5 really interesting topics. One, obvious, the path of the European Union towards success, our industry going to get our goals. At the end of the day, the whole point why we are here. Another one, the opportunities and challenges of decarbonization. We also talked about the opportunities that the single market has opened up for the EU industry. We shall be talking about that more tomorrow. We talked about an issue that we all share in Europe, the shortage of skills and how to address that shortage. We were very honored to have the presence of DG Director General Juste Corte from talking to us yesterday about the European Union Year of Skills yesterday, if you remember. We also talked about the role of the European Union in the manufacturing of electric batteries. We spent quite a lot of time talking about that pathway. And we also, obviously, had interesting conversations about business leadership in the face of economic and digital transformation with, if you recall, the presence of top industrial leaders, both from Spain and abroad. In total, we had 15 breakout sessions in the rooms outside, discussing more in depth. We will have some of them today. And well, this is what we did yesterday. Today, we will be doing very much the same. We will have plenary sessions here all the way until coffee break, which will be at 10 to 11. Then we will have 5 important information. Then we will have 5 parallel sessions like yesterday until lunch. And after lunch, we welcome you back here to stay working until 4, and then we will break out again for parallel sessions. So that's the program for today. I hope you enjoy it. And we're going to start straight away with our first session. We have speakers and moderator ready, so let me introduce it to you. We're going to talk about public and private financing routes available to support this necessary transition to net zero. To do that, Frédéric Lucenet, the Global Head of Manufacturing and Services at the European Bank for Reconstruction, is joining us. Thank you very much, Frédéric. He will be chairing the session and also introducing the panelists who are, come with us, Ricardo Mourinho, José Carlos García, Elena Bow, and Nicholas Bryan. So let's give them a round of applause to wake up and welcome them on stage. Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning, welcome. So we'll have nearly an hour this morning on these fascinating subjects. Just to remind everyone in the room and online, if you're watching, that we'll have first a discussion, and then you'll be able to ask these questions either directly or through the Slido software that we have. So for those of you who've not downloaded the Slido software, you can do it with the QR code that was given to you. So yes, let me come back to what we discussed yesterday. We heard a lot about the need for skills, the regulations that are in place, the EU funding available, but we also heard, for example, Commissioner Breton saying that we needed factories. We need to install, for example, 50 gigawatts of solars, but we don't have the factories to make them. We also heard mining experts saying that they needed capital for early explorations, or otherwise they would go into joint venture with, for example, Chinese investors. So there's a lot that needs to be financing. The European Commission Net Zero Industrial Act outlines measures to create the right condition for the scale-up of these technologies, and including the regulatory framework, higher investment certainty, lower administrative encumbrance, and better market access. Let's see with our distinguished panel this morning how we can finance all of this. We have panelists who cover a very large spectrum of financing options, from early VC capital to the largest mega battery factories. So I'll introduce them quickly. We have Elena Bu, who is co-founder and executive board member of EIT Imo Energy. Imo Energy is a company established in 2010, supported by the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, with the mission to foster the energy transition and to be the leading innovation engine in sustainable energy. Imo Energy has supported more than 500 climate tech startups. Elena is also a professor at the ESADE Business School since 1998. On my left, Ricardo Mourinho Felix is vice president at the European Investment Bank since 2020. He's in charge of the bank's funding, treasury, economic analysis, research activities, as well as supporting the EU programs such as the RRF, the EU Invest, and Just Transition Mechanism. He's responsible for relations with Spain, Portugal, the Maghreb, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Next to him, in the middle, José Carlos García de Quevedo was appointed chairman of the Instituto de Crédito Oficial in June 2018 here in Spain. He's a member of the Trade Expert and State Economist Service and holds a master degrees from the Complutense University of Madrid in economics and business. He's held many positions of responsibilities in the areas of investment and finance, foreign trade, insurance, pension funds, nationally and internationally. And the far end, Nicolas Briand has been a CEO of the startup ecosystem for the past 7 years. He's become famous in 2021 for suing Apple, winning 2 legal cases, and was nominated European Young Leader in 2022. Nicolas is also an investor and an international board member in various companies. So maybe I'll start with you, Ricardo, representing the EIB, a very large balance sheet. Finance for the green transition is an evolving asset class. It's already complex with multiple products, regulatory requirements. Financial institutions like yours need to build the internal capacity and develop dedicated strategies to finance these new technologies, but also to fund early disposal of high CO2 emitting assets. Do you think the financial landscape has evolved, progressed sufficiently to do all this? And yourself, are you ready to engage?
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting us to participate in this panel. And the reply is yes, the financial sector is changing. Since the EU Green Deal, there was a lot of changes at the EIB, but also in the ecosystem, in the IFIs, and in the national promotional and development institutions towards taking the resources to address this big challenge of the twin transition, of the climate and digital transition. I would say that there are 4 factors that determine why the financial sector changed. Well, first, because there is a demand by the society, stakeholders, shareholders, investors, customers, demand companies to green their balance sheets. And the financial sector is also part of this change and is funding this change. And this has been very important from the motivation and from the impetus. But then you have the regulation. Regulation is changing. You have the disclosures, an increase in the disclosures. Listed companies need to be completely transparent and put forward what are the strategies. And this more and increased transparency create an additional incentive. And then there is the more substantial part, meaning that given the objective of the transition till 2050 to a net zero, it's clear that all companies need to do it. A company that has not done at least half of the way till 2030 will not resist, will be a company that will be out of the market for not being sustainable. And this creates the biggest and the most important incentive, which is the market. Then comes the funding, and every time you come to a conference, there is always this discussion about is funding enough, is not funding enough, is there enough funding, is money the problem, is not money the problem. And I would say yes, money is the problem, because you need resources, and the amount of resources that you need to do this transition is simply huge. So what can we do as public policy institutions, EIB, EBRD, ECO, all the public policy institutions? What we can do is to use our resources to mobilize private resources, to be catalytic. And that's where I think the EIB, as well as EBRD and ECO, play a critical role. By putting a bit of our resources behind these projects, we can bring lots of private money and gather the resources that are needed to do the transition. Many times people speak, and I'm sure that here we are already alluded to numbers, how much is needed of investment. And then the number starts at 300 billion additional per year and goes up to the sky. Well, I think nobody has this number. Of course, you can always produce estimates that go to 400, 600 billion per year. The issue is that how much money we need to address the good projects. And that's where we bring value, by selecting the good projects and matching the funding with the good projects. All projects are different. You have different types of financial structures, and the IB can provide different types of funding, from the plain vanilla loans to project finance, non-recourse, to structures that take into account the cash flows under the risk, such that we share the risk with the private sector. And I used to say that's what us as public policy institutions bring. Two production factors that are critical for this transition and for innovation. Lots of patience, because we have very patient shareholders. We are not looking at the profits that we need to disclose next year, so we can have a longer term perspective, and at the same time risk-sharing capacity, the ability of looking into a project that for the private sector is simply too risky, take 20% of the equity piece, and by taking this 20%, doing a very thorough due diligence, putting a quality stamp, attract the private capital such that we multiply public resources by 3, 4, 5, 6 times, or even when you go into equity, even more. And that's the way we as public policy institutions can make this transition happening. Of course, is that everything? Can public policy institutions do everything? And the answer is no. No, we need more. We need a framework that allows capital to flow in a much more fluid manner in the European Union. We need a deeper venture capital market. EIF is doing, I would say, quite a lot in the venture capital market in funding startups, but we need more. That's why we put in place with the governments of Spain, Italy, France, Germany, Belgium, this European Tech Champion Initiative. That was a critical project to allow us, as Europe, to look at the scale-ups and have a finance for scale-ups. And we need to take this as an open strategic autonomy perspective, meaning that it's not about retaining European companies in Europe, It's about European companies, as well as American or Asian companies, can decide where they should locate, not based on the availability of finance, but based on where there is the knowledge, where there is the best place to develop their projects, and not having the need to move out of Europe when they reach a certain stage because they don't have a deep enough venture capital market in Europe. And I think that would be critical for doing this green transition and to support the EU industry in developing. Having an open strategic autonomy perspective of producing in Europe, producing outside Europe, but ensure enough supply chains and enough resilience such that we are not dependent of one or two suppliers and then fall in situations like we experimented in Europe during COVID and more recently with the war in Ukraine with the supply of energy.
Thank you very much. Maybe, José Carlos, the same question to you from your perspective here in Spain.
Okay, thank you very much. I will try to start where some comments Ricardo has said. Here, to tackle with sustainability in the whole society, we have to take into account different levels, policymakers, not only at the European Union or national level, that this is the case of the Official Credit Institute, but also at multilateral level. Financial sector is very, very important. It has to mobilize a lot of resources to facilitate the green transitions and companies and consumers. And I want to start with a positive message that there is the will, the commitment, and the consensus among all them that here we have to incorporate it, Fit for 55, net zero emission for 2050, etc., etc. And this is very important in the financial sector, and ICO has introduced the sustainability policy, enlarging with a very ambitious, balanced, and comprehensive approach in all the organization and in all our activities. But as national promotional bank, as the European Investment Bank or the KfW or BIP in France, we have a double challenge because we have to accelerate, to lead the green and digital transitions on the one hand, but on the other hand, we should not leave anyone behind. We have to provide a just transition above all for those small and medium-sized companies, self-employed, that perhaps require more time to adjust for the new requirement, the new regulations. I will always promote positive incentives, both for the financial sector and for the company through green loans or sustainability-linked loans, etc., new products. Innovation is very, very important. In the new strategy of the Official Credit Institute for now to 2027, we have taken as a framework two pillars. On the one hand, the recovery, transformation, and resilience plan of the government, and on the other hand, the multi-annual financial framework and next generation funds. The European Union is providing resources and capabilities to facilitate the green transition. And we have prepared ourselves, being implementing partner of the Commission of the European Union. And more recently, you are aware in Spain that the Commission have approved the second part of the agenda of the Recovery, Transformation and Resilience Plan for Spain that will go to the ECOFIN this week. And we are going to manage the Eco Green Line, the Nestec funds, the line for companies and entrepreneurs, the Spain Audiovisual Hub, summing up around 40 billion euros. These are the resources. But as I said at the beginning, it's very, very important to do it in public-private partnership. And this, here, the financial sector plays a very, very important role, both in the credit activity, requiring the greener of all the productive process and the consumer patent, but also as issuance of sustainable bonds that make the signal to investors about the commitment. To be committed means that we have to use more data, to collaborate more, to take data, to be able to demonstrate the use of proceeds and the impact assessment involved in reduction of emissions and in the decarbonization process and net zero emissions, involving all the actors in the society.
Thank you, Jose Carlos. Elena, we turn to you because you see a very broad spectrum of investors. Where do you feel we can do more at the banks like EIB, EBRD, or at the EU level to support the private sector? Which sectors do you see today need more financing than others? Can you give us your views? Thank you.
Yes. So InnoEnergy is not a bank. So I mean, we are just a small actor in the ecosystem. And since the year 2010, we have tried to look for these rough diamonds that are in Europe, in terms like Nicola, with their ideas and their innovations, to bring them to the market, to make them bigger, accelerate them, and de-risk them. That has been what we have been doing in the last 13 years. So what we have, I mean, you were asking, okay, where we can push even more, okay? Of course, we need a lot of more financing. But I'm going to tackle another thing, which is deployment. It's not only about more money, but simplicity and speed in the deployment. And I'm going to just to use an example, the IRA in the United States. We are not like the United States. It's obvious. We have to do it in our way. But the truth is that in 1 year, they have been able to implement $110 billion in clean tech investments in 1 year. And this means that these companies, they have already the cash in order to implement this. Here in Europe, we are a bit the time to cash, let's say. It takes us much more time. Sorry. Not only if we are talking about different calls, so it takes about 1 year to be decided, and some time, I mean, many months in order to be deployed. So we need this kind of simplicity and speed. And then the other thing is that another aspect is about what it is missing. And here I'm going to put an example. We have something for the net zero that it is super relevant, are the called industrial startups. We have already 4 unicorns as industrial startups. But the way has not been easy. An industrial startup is a company that it still has risk, not technological risk. Let's take like an example of a gigafactory. The gigafactory, I mean, they are using chemistry that it is already proven, is the NMC. So technically, there is no risk. But there is a lot of innovation in terms of circularity, in terms of vertical integration, in terms of production, reducing the scrap, and so on. But then when you go to look for funding, the first thing is, oh, it's not an innovation thing. Okay? So first tick on the block. Then secondly, these companies are super early stage. So you go to the VC. But the VC sees the large tickets and they say, no, 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 this is not our arena. Then you go to the commercial bank. The commercial bank says, fantastic, yes, the ticket, we like it, this kind of large projects. Yes, it's going to be super benefit. But you are not bankable. So here we have a question mark. And the EIB is true that it is helping a lot in this kind of giving a signal to the market, but it still is a question. The other topic that it is not solved is what we call the tough tech. And the tough tech, for instance, is fusion. And here is similar to the case that the gigafactories, because they need super intensive large tickets, but they have high technology risk. So this is, for me, the 2 messages at this moment is that, yes, we need money, of course. I mean, the challenge is huge. But deployment, in terms of simplicity and speed, and secondly, to fill the gaps of these kind of companies that are crucial if we want to achieve the net zero objectives, because the industrial startups are providing the volumes. This is for tomorrow. And this tough tech is providing the future. It's going to be what is going to be the solution around the year 2030, 2035.
Thank you. That's very clear. Would you, to link to the discussions yesterday, you gave the example of the battery as industrial startup. Would you include as well the solar panel manufacturing industry in this group, where we need capital and grow what is currently mostly a group of smaller companies?
Yeah. I'm happy you mentioned that, because in the year, InnoEnergy received the mandate from the European Commission to lead the European Battery Alliance. So we are from the very first beginning, we are very used to this topic. And also, we are in the SIA, which is the European Solar PV Industry Alliance. What is the problem here? The problem here is that if you see the value chain, and we can say, okay, we want PV, and we want PV made in Europe, but then let's go backwards. And then we have to see that silicon and polysilicon, we only have 11% of the manufacturing capacity in Europe. Ingots, it is around 1%. So the thing is that unless we take an approach of the strategic value chain as a whole, and we fill in the initial stages, then it's going to happen what it has happened last year. The market has been massive in terms of PV panels, 95% from China.
Very good. That links well to the expertise of Nicolas. And maybe on this last point from Elena, can you explain to us why the VC landscape is different today? It was quite a success a few years ago on the digital tech. Why is it more difficult today to finance the type of ventures that Elena mentioned?
Well, that's a very tough question. What we need to realize is that we won't be successful in the green transition without innovation. And clearly, we need to find these ways to make all this money that you guys mentioned trickle down to the innovators. And I'm sorry for the big guys in the room, but a lot of the innovators are not the big corp, but the innovative SMEs and obviously the startups. If we look at the bigger pictures, I mean, it's massive needs of financing. I'm starting my startup in the waste management. Waste management market is $2.1 trillion. We are not talking about making a little nice software somewhere in the garage to disrupt some fintech or whatever. It's really massive markets. Same thing with water distribution, same thing with solar panels, same thing with electricity. We have these massive markets that we need to disrupt and where we need to innovate. And I will totally pick up on one very important thing that Elena said. It's not about necessarily more money, it's also about different money. What is a game changer with financing the green transition is that we are not financing the easy businesses of software. We are not trying to build another Google. We are trying to build very complex businesses with sometimes very exotic business models that the venture capitalists don't really like. We are not having software, we're having B2G2C business models, we're having B2B2G2C business models. So very exotic stuff that the venture capitalists most of the time don't understand. Another big game changer is, you mentioned it, capital expenditures. The innovation, the guys that have been funding innovation in the Silicon Valley or in the EU over the past years, they are not used to fund and to finance capital expenditures. They are used to the software stuff that is very easy to scale. And maybe if I want to sum up my point is, we've had this very famous sentence by the Americans: software is eating the world. what we know for sure is that software is eating the world, but it's not going to save it. It's not going to save the planet. We will need more hardware. We will need more capital expenditures. We will need more exotic business models. That's the point I wanted to make today.
That's very clear. And I think it relates to one point you made, Ricardo, about the EIF being very active. Probably Nicolas can confirm the EIF has supported very much the digital tech industry, startup industry in Europe. Is the EIF, like the EIB, ready for this? Is that a challenge? That
Definitely. The EIF, as well as the EIB, we are ready. We work as a group. We have a whole portfolio of instruments that we can use. And of course, that EIF is key on 2 dimensions at least, on intermediated fundings through the banking sector to support the transition of SMEs, but also in supporting the venture capital ecosystem and inputting funds through intermediated fund managers in favorable conditions such that we can support the venture capital from seeds to later stage. And that later stage is what we brought with the European Tech Champion Initiative. And that's how we support the ecosystem, and that's key. When it comes to the question of solar panels, well, if you ask a consumer, the consumer doesn't want a used solar panel. The consumer wants efficient solar panel, want a very good solar panel, and want a cheap solar panel. And then these days, in Europe, and I would say in the developed world, we want also solar panels that are produced under sustainability conditions, not by forced labor, not by child labor, and respecting the environment. That's what we want. So what we need is to have enough supply. And why only 10% of this is produced in Europe? That's the question we need to ask to ourselves. And then ask the companies, the venture capital, the producers that are in the market, the mega companies, the mega factories, how to produce more, how to produce better, and then that's where we kick in, by providing the funds and providing the conditions. And essentially is a question of competitiveness that we need to look at, and level playing field at the same time, because we cannot be in the market competing with blocks that provide huge amounts of subsidies. The European Union is not a subsidy-based economy. And we need to keep our economy as a sound economy. And for this, we need to put in place the proper structure. And I think that EIB, as well as the national promotional institutions, are key in providing the right incentives, in funding bankable projects. Because EIB, ECO, all the national promotional institutions, what is do is to fund projects that are bankable, but that don't find the appropriate conditions to prosper in the market. What to do is put a bit of public money to make these projects under better conditions. And that's why when it comes to discussion about is there enough money or not enough projects, I would say it's very good that you have more projects than money, because that's what puts tension on people to choose the best projects. If you have more money than projects, you finance all of them, half of them, usually it's not good enough, and then you are not doing the job. So it's good that you have that we have more projects than money, such that we choose the good projects. When it comes to how we are addressing this challenge, so we put in place this climate bank roadmap. We finance in this critical decade so far almost 300 billion. We mobilized 300 billion euro of investment over the last 3 years. We are well on track to meet the 1 trillion objective that we set for the decade. We are already above the 50% commitment of devoting 50% of our funding to climate action and environmental sustainability. Last year, we reached 58%, and we intend to be above the 50% going forward. I think that that's the best contribution we can make. Are we prepared to do more? Yes, that's what it did with REPowerEU. When the EU approved the REPowerEU, we approved our program REPowerEU. The demand was simply huge for essentially energy, renewable energy, energy efficiency. We increased from 30 billion to 45 billion over the next 6 years. We intend to mobilize 150 billion of projects. And I think that's the best response that we as the EU bank can provide to this challenge. We are, with ECO and with other implementing partners, also involved in InvestEU in the 4 windows, in the windows that support from renewable energy to sustainable transport to SMEs and venture capital, in these thematic windows that allow us to take more risk than what a AAA bank can take on balance sheet. So that's our value proposal, that's how we are putting this forward with advisory in order to support our counterparts to do the green transition in a smarter and better way.
Very clear. You mentioned it, and for the other panelists, maybe beyond finance or to help finance, we need the right signals. The signals come from the EU through regulation. You mentioned solar panels. Do we have a definition of what is a sustainable solar panel? No. Yesterday we discussed, we don't have yet the definition of what is a green steel, what is green aluminum. So what are the signals that are still lacking and will help your industry? Maybe we come back to Nicolas. For example, on the procurement, on the tender, is there something that beyond financing, regulation can push innovation?
I'm super glad that you're mentioning this. In financing innovation, obviously we think about the venture capital, we think about the big banks, but you know, as an entrepreneur, I prefer to sign a $1 million contract with EIB rather than receive $1 million investment from EIB. I prefer money in terms of revenues, and that would be fantastic if we could open up a little bit the tenders. I think we have to look on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean in order to find some very interesting examples on how to really have innovative public tenders. That's something we haven't really cracked on this side of the Atlantic Ocean. If you look at France, if you look at Germany, if you look at EU level, clearly the amount of public tenders that go to innovative SMEs and startups is really low. It's incredibly low, and as I mentioned, we will never succeed in the green transition if we don't make sure that these startups can access public procurement. To me, that's really the key element for the guys in the room here.
Elena, I see you shaking your head.
Yes, because one thing that we are talking about investment, no? And one thing that the investments are looking for is certainty. And certainty that somehow they are going to be a market afterwards. So then here we come regulation in place. On one hand, the good thing, and we should be very happy, is that Canada and Europe are the only countries that they have in their law the targets. Okay? And this gives certainty to the investors in order to say, okay, this is serious. But then we need also to create the market conditions in the way that Europe wants to compete. And here is, for instance, the tenders plays a critical aspect. An example of wind energy. Wind energy, the tenders is about cost. It's purely. They are not talking about sustainability. They are not talking about recyclability. They are not talking about circularity. Then the European players, many times they lose these tenders because the European players are betting for sustainability and circularity. The same thing with PV panels. This is something that, for instance, the last battery passport that the European Commission is pushing, that is guaranteeing that anybody can come here to Europe to produce batteries, but they need to fulfill some commitments in terms of sustainability and circularity. So still we are in the open free market, but with some kind of conditions. And this is super relevant because this means somehow when the investor is going to recover because there is the market attractiveness there. And the second thing is permitting. Now we are very fan of green hydrogen, which is super important. But green hydrogen has to do with renewables, and renewables has to do with permitting. And it cannot be that it is taking years and years in Europe to get this kind of permission, in comparison with the US, that basically is 12 months. That is. So this is very important because then when an investor, a private investor, is thinking, okay, I'm going to start betting here, he needs to think when the money is going to have a return.
No.
Without also, I mean, just talking from the perspective of the investors, for me, the major issue is that this green hydrogen will not be in place till I don't know when. Okay? So regulation has, we have a very strong regulation in Europe. It's a question about deployment and making it much more agile.
I think everybody agrees here that we have trade policy within the European Union should remain open to the market and open to foreign direct investment, but with a level playing field, as you mentioned. And the Commission is taking steps towards guarantee level playing field with the carbon adjustment mechanisms in the borders, avoiding environment dumping from other parts of the world. Here, you were mentioning about venture capital and contracts. We have to be innovative and we have to combine, to blend different instruments. And here we are working with corporate venture to invest, for example, in Fondico Nestec, creating a professional background to invest in startups, innovation, with the aim to provide contracts of goods, services, software, hardware, from corporate venture to the startups in the long term. And here, from National Promotional Bank, we have to be even more innovative and to have more risk. When we are talking about photovoltaic, renewable energy, hydrogen, there is merchant risk about the price of energy in the long term. So we have to assume more risk, to take more risk, and we have started to do it already for the first time last year with these PPPs, contracts in the renewable energy border. The International Energy Agency in the early 20s said that there is only 50% of the technology available for the green transition to reach net zero in 2050. Now it's 65. We have a gap of 35 technology that will be required to innovate, to in research and development to match our goals. And that's very important, and we should be doing it. In ECO, we are aware of the relevance of venture capital. We are participating in the European Tech Champion Initiative with 1 billion euros from our side, but we have Fondico Nestec already with 4 billion euros for a scale-up, but we take care also of the seed and startups process with other innovative about crowdfunding, crowdlending, and other initiatives related to impact, social and green impact funds. And we will be enlarging all the resources available to it. And as you mentioned, that was very important what she said, is simplicity, speed, and predictability. So the rules, it will be maintained and only can be improved from now to the future. And that's why we are working on it in the National Promotional Bank.
So before I open to questions from the audience, one last word from
Just one remark on precisely on regulation. I think that what we need is not regulation, is regulatory certainty. Regulation that stays and that provides visibility for a long-term period such that investors know what they can expect. And we need to have science-based regulation, but we need the regulation to be at the same time implementable and enforceable. And this requires that it's science-based, but that is pragmatic, that is simple enough. The other thing we need to resist is to use regulation for protectionism. We will never get to a resilient world if we think that depending on ourselves is much better than depending on somebody else. Depending on ourselves only is maybe just slightly better than depending on third parties. If we want a resilient world, we need to define it such that we then don't depend on nobody else, including from ourselves. We need to have a fully diversified supply chain, and regulation is critical, but regulatory certainty is key. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we take questions from Slido online, I would like first to ask if there's anyone in the room. It's early morning, but yeah, I can see a few hands raised. Do we have a microphone at the back or on the table here? There's two questions here. Microphone, no? If you can shout, you go first, yes. And I'll repeat the question in case it's not. Oh, there's a microphone coming. If you can introduce yourself as well, please. Thank you.
You will have to shout.
Yeah, it's working now. It's working now. That's normal. That's the first session today. Perfect.
Very good. Good morning. My name is Mike Sutton. I live in Malaga. I'm a tech entrepreneur like Nicolas. My expertise is in building startups. So I run a remote accelerator for European startups. Pre-seed, pre-idea, non-technical founders. The really interesting thing, and I thank you, Frederick, for assembling this lovely panel. I'm sitting here watching this. I don't tend to play with the EU because it's big and mean and just big. But I look at this panel here, and you look like a Kanban board to me. You look like a value stream. We have the money at one end, and we have the deployment at the other end. And it doesn't seem to me, from where I'm sitting, that that you recognize that, and B, that you behave like that. When I run my projects, I like to see the end-to-end. So we have Ricardo, who says, we've deployed 300 billion and 100 billion trillion. But at the other end, Nicolas, I'm not getting any of that. So who is it in the EU who is really watching the flow? Elena has said, she's in this column of deployment, and she's saying, upstream, there's the cash, but it's not getting to me. So who is it that is responsible for the optimization of this flow? One name, one department, one group. Who is it? And we need to figure that out. Number one. Can I ask another?
Sure.
Okay. We talk about private-public initiatives, and on average, they're a good idea. But there are two critical concepts at play. EU is a social driver. You're not about profit. You're about keeping this beautiful union from imploding. Private is purely about profit, baby. How do you level that equation? How do you meld the social benefits with the profit initiative? America is not a great example for this because they're all about the profit, baby. And that's what sets us apart from the US. We can learn some things from there, but Europe has its own path to play. And I personally would not like to see a place that is overly profit-driven. When we create innovation to prevent floods and drought, there's no real direct profit motive to that. There is a let's not all die from the climate crisis motive. So how do you marry that? What's the governing framework to manage that profit social relationship?
Maybe if there was a question just in front of, if you can give the microphone, we'll take one more question because I see we're running out of time, and then we'll try to answer them together.
Good morning. My name is Alfred Middelkamp. I represent the north of the Netherlands, the regional governments. We help a lot of companies trying to make the energy transition. And what I'd like to add to the discussion, a lot of interesting things are being said already, is that, in my opinion, we're not working here to make the energy transition possible. I truly believe that it will happen. What we're trying to do is speed things up, to get there earlier. And to that respect, I feel that we're in the middle of a change coming from mainly financing capital costs and that we're going more and more towards options and first initiatives to also finance operational costs. And this does bring us in where you just mentioned, we are not a subsidy-based economy, but of course financing operational costs, if not with a subsidy, how else? I hear the option clearly, regulation, trying to make a market using rules, but that will take time. And if we need to speed up, I would feel that more and more we're going to see operational cost financing, hydrogen bank being one of the first examples of that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Do you feel that we will see more and more of EU funds being deployed towards operational costs?
I think, and I see the time is up, but I'll give the answers. I think you mentioned the hydrogen bank, and that's what we spoke about when we spoke about tenders, about certitude of contracts. I'll let who wants to start? Helena?
Well, thank you for the questions. They are really interesting. Starting with the last one, you have said, oh, regulation is going to take time. And why it should take time? I mean, it's like, why we are taking for granted that everything that has to do with the system should be slow. Just an example. I think that the European Commission has put in place this kind of strategic projects that they are trying to speed in terms of permitting and so on. Why the countries are not using it? There are countries in Europe that they are using this kind of advantage in order to accelerate. France is one of them. Why the others cannot do the same? Why my Spanish government cannot do the same? I don't know. Probably somebody knows. So there are options, and I think that this is very important because we are going not only to innovation but to industrialization. And that is where your aspect about also the operating cost would be there. But I mean, let's be much more demanding as citizens in order to mobilize quickly those resources. And then to Max, the second one, I will tackle the second one. We are a private company, but our key KPI, of course, at the end, we need revenues because we need to be sustainable. But it is the CO2 that we save. And I can tell you now, for instance, that our portfolio today, I mean, from now till the year 2030, they are going to save 2.1 gigatons because we measure it, because that is our way of measuring success. So I think that there are many companies that today they understand that profits is not only the economic profits, it's also people and it is also planet. And in terms of the people, the IRA, I mean, one of the key aspects is not only climate tech. I think that for some of the Americans, that is an excuse. What they are trying to do is to create good quality jobs. That is what they have been pushing. So at the end, the economy today, the trigger is going to be the climate tech, yes, but then let's use it for a good reason, because it has a very good purpose in order to create better jobs and also the social and the planet.
Very quickly, because I get calls to close.
I was about to ask if we had one more hour to answer the questions, but I'll try to keep it straight. I'm not saying that these guys are doing a bad job. I'm just saying that we will need, collectively, to start looking at things differently. We'll need to start doing a different job. When I am fundraising for my waste management startup, I just don't get into the right frames. So the investors tell me, okay, well, your waste management, you're a mix of software and hardware. I don't do hardware. That's this problem, is that we've built our investment ecosystem on basically software as a service, B2B kind of business models, the big fat unicorns that you see on the NASDAQ right now. And we need to change a little bit our focus and our mindset. And really the rock stars of venture capital globally, it's not specific to the EU, they've built their fortune on a business model that is very different from the business models that we need to invent to succeed in the green tech transition. And just the last question, tenders. It's super important. I mean, water is about municipalities. Electricity is about government. waste management is also about municipalities. When I look at the market size, I mean, everything has to come through a tender, and most of the time it's a public tender. When I look at waste management, for instance, you've seen all the buzz about generative AI, right? Oh, it's fantastic. It's a 10 billion global market. The market for waste collection just in France is 18 billion. 10 billion generative AI. Ah, it's fantastic. 18 billion for real stuff. So we won't crack any of the waste management market, any of the water distribution market, if we don't find a way to access these public tenders. And that's super, super important, I believe.
Thank you, Nicolas. I will have to end here, but we have the whole day to discuss those subjects and to come back to some of your questions. A big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much for your time and
Thank you very much.
comments. Have a good day, everyone.